I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi, my name is Anna and I am the Natural Birth Podcast host. I'm a former midwife who left the system and I'm now the proud founder of Sacred Birth International, a woman-owned company with a mission to revolutionize the birth world and bring focus to the sacred and the natural intelligence of the birth process. We do this by providing world-class education, courses, programs, and coaching to equip women with the knowledge and the tools to have conscious pregnancies, empowering and positive birth experiences, and the most nourishing start possible for themselves and their babies postpartum. We also educate and mentor aspiring birth workers into sacred space holders and physiological birth advocates in the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, the Beyond a Doula training. If you'd like to work with me or take any of our courses, programs, or the mentorship, then head on over to sacredbirthinternational.com to find out more. Hi, Carly, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
Hi, Anna. I'm great, and I'm very excited to be here.
Excited to have you, a fellow home birth midwife and Australian on that. And you've been spending time in Bali and working at Bumisa Hut. So I'm just so fascinated and so curious about all of your stories and your life. So please take us back to becoming pregnant the first time. And, were you a midwife at that point when you became pregnant? Oh, yay! Take us back to that story. I would love to hear how it is to, for you to have been a midwife before having babies and then deciding what you wanted to do for your births.
Yeah, I'd love to share about that. I'd been a midwife for about 5 years before I was ready to have my own baby. And most of that time I'd been working in Bali. So I was in Bali and I was living and breathing midwifery. I was so deep into the midwifery world and it was such a huge part of my identity. I couldn't really imagine doing anything else. It was just, I just couldn't believe that that was what I got to call work. It was such a privilege to be able to be there with families in these most incredible, pivotal moments of their life. And every time it would feel like that. I wondered, do people actually get to a point where they don't feel like that at births anymore? And perhaps that's a real message of when it's time to move to a different place or a different line of offering or service or work. Because for me, every birth just felt like such a gift and such a privilege. I just felt, how incredible that I get to do this and that I get to have these relationships with families and that I get to walk alongside them and be part of their journey. I was just so grateful for that. And I was a yes midwife. So whatever anyone asked, I said yes. And living and working in Bali, that often meant I wore many different hats. So I wasn't only just supporting people throughout pregnancy and through the birth portal and postpartum. There would be breastfeeding challenges that were happening or things that were happening with their baby or child that they were unsure of. And because of the lack of lactation consultants or pediatricians or family health nurses, then often I would be asked to step in when it was really quite beyond my skill set or scope of practice. However, I didn't know how to say no. And it was such a tricky space to be in because what else were those people going to do? So fortunately, I had a lot of support around me and I was able to phone a friend. So phone a pediatrician friend in Australia, or my cousin is a pediatrician. So I was able to call in support. But those extra hats that I was wearing also extended to helping with language support because I speak Indonesian, or helping with getting a visa agent because the visa needed to be extended for people, or all these different layers to it. And this was supporting Indonesian families as well as expat families and mixed families. So each family had different needs, like all families. However, for the families that had come from outside Indonesia, obviously there were extra layers of support that was needed. And so as the time went on, I noticed that I was starting to think about wanting to have my own baby, and my partner and I were talking about pregnancy and babies and family. And I felt very clearly that I wouldn't be able to fall pregnant with the kind of life that I was living, that I was so it was just all encompassing, and it was all centered on giving. Like everything that I was doing was giving, 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 and saying yes and stretching myself to all these different places. And I just thought, how can a little baby who's looking down on me and my partner see space for them in that family? And it almost felt impossible. And we hadn't actually started calling in a baby at this point. I was really just looking towards the future and thinking, like, is it possible for a baby to arrive in our family given what's happening at the moment, and given that I feel like I haven't learned how to really take care of myself, and I haven't really learned how to put boundaries in, and I haven't learned how to honor my own needs. So that felt like such a, yeah, I guess a lesson or a learning that was happening even before pregnancy. And it felt very clear that something had to shift for that to happen.
I love this so, so much. And I so fully understand what you were going through, in a sense of that is, I think so many of us, especially when you choose to work maybe as a home birth midwife, or just we're a special kettle of fish. And we tend to overgive, give. And it's in the beginning, it's only like, because it's so magical to tend births and, be with women and just. But yeah, it gets to a point where you realize, hey, am I actually in balance here? Like work-life balance. I feel definitely for birth workers in general, is something we always have to be mindful about, and taking pauses and having, proper rest, and also serving ourselves. And as women wanting to become pregnant, you need to be in the receiving end, right? You need to allow the feminine and not just give, give, give. You need to then receive, right? So love that piece of wisdom from your story.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And there were actually physical signs that I was noticing just in terms of how I was feeling in my body and how I was even feeling in my womb space, and noticing that it didn't feel like there was a lot of openness there. So looking ahead, it felt like things needed to shift in order for pregnancy to happen, or in order to call in a baby and feel that I was doing what I wanted to. I was preparing in the way that I wanted to.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
So what did that look like for you?
It looked like making some changes, and I think realizing that the role that I had in Bali was a volunteer role. And so I felt incredibly committed to giving all of my energy. I felt incredibly committed, and I was working at Burmese Heart Clinic, and a lot of the people that were working there were giving all that they had. And so there was really this tone of giving. And I felt like if I continued working in this way, that I wouldn't be able to shift things. And so I started to think about different ways of working, and was it possible for me to continue working in Bali and create more space in my life and start giving to myself and creating a fertile life, creating space in my life for a baby to come in. And I wasn't really sure if it was possible, given what I shared before about feeling like you had to wear all of the hats, and that it just felt like such a huge responsibility, because if you said no, like where would that person go? There was only there was Burmese Heart and many different midwives working at Burmese Heart. And then for English speaking midwives or foreign trained midwives, there was only a couple of us. So it really felt like if we said no, where were those people going to go? And again, looking back, I know that the right person would have come along, and that they would have found the care and support that they needed. But at that time, I was too deep in it and too consumed by responsibility and giving, and probably a little bit of ego as well, of being like the one that people reached out to, or the one that people asked for support from. It was such a huge part of my identity. So really moving away from that. Yeah, I got a job opportunity in Australia and I took it. So I wasn't particularly looking to move away from Bali for any time. However, I got a job opportunity in Australia, and I thought this feels like the right time to explore midwifery in a different place, in a different setting, and see if I can create more balance in my life, knowing that I'm really wanting to have a baby.
Beautiful. Do you want to share now how you became pregnant and dive on into your
Yeah,
birth stories? Yeah.
yeah. So we ended up in Darwin in the Northern Territory, which feels, I mean, it's similar to Australia to Bali in that it's tropical, and there's lots of parallels in that sense. But in terms of space, it's the most expansive land, and there is so much space there. And it felt like the complete opposite of Bali, which feels incredibly like dense and busy, and even, I guess, everyone is so the spirituality and religion is so strong, and that can often feel very dense as well. So sometimes I wondered how much space there is for babies to come in when it's so busy up there. So coming to Australia, coming to Darwin, just felt like there was such a huge amount of space for that to happen. And life felt so different. Life slowed right down. And the work that I was doing was very different. I was a midwife, and that was my role. I wasn't trying to support people with things that were beyond my skill set. And I had another midwife that I was working with, and I had lots of supports to call on. So it felt like all of a sudden I was in this there was a lot more balance in terms of the work. And I felt like I was ready to receive. I was in that really open space and very happy, because it was such a change from what I'd been doing, where I'd felt almost burdened by responsibility, even though it was such a gift and probably will be one of the most beautiful, biggest experiences of my life, having that time midwifing in Bali. But I was ready for a change. And so my partner and I were very happy to invite a baby into our life. And yeah, it happened quite soon after, I think maybe 2 months after arriving in Australia.
Beautiful. And did you know from the get-go that you wanted to free birth your baby?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know how I wanted to birth my baby. I knew that it would be at home. given that I'd been supporting women to birth at home for many years. My mum had had home births, and all of the people around me, that was much more in my field than other ways of birthing. And I didn't know that I wanted to free birth. I knew that I wanted to birth on my own terms. And I wondered how that would look. I wondered if I could have a midwife to support me to do that. And at the time in the Northern Territory, there were no private midwives. So there wasn't actually a midwife to look to meet and to look into working with. And I think I'm not sure if I would have looked into it, to be honest, but it was an option that wasn't available to me. So yeah.
So the options there were like, did you work then in a hospital in Darwin, or was there any kind of birth center or home birth service through like
Yeah.
funded or?
Yeah, it was a publicly funded home birth service.
Oh, okay. But you felt like
Yeah.
you didn't want to birth with your colleagues at that time.
I didn't want to birth with the publicly funded home birth service.
Do you want to share why? Because I think this is so important for people to hear how every woman resonates or reasons around these decisions. Yeah. I'd love to hear what
Sure.
made you
Yeah.
feel that. Yeah.
Well, as I said before, I wanted to birth on my own terms.
Mm.
And I think that looks differently for everybody. And maybe some people feel like they did birth on their own terms, and then they have another baby and they're like, oh, now I've birthed on my own terms. Or then they have another baby and they're like, oh, now I've birthed on my own terms. So I guess for me, I had spent maybe, I don't know how many years, must have been close to 10 years doing birth work and just really witnessing women in their power and knowing what they're capable of, and knowing that really women don't need us. Women don't need midwives. They need to be held and supported, and they need to be shown that, well, they don't need to be shown. It's helpful to be reminded that they have the power within them. And so it's not that I feel like midwives don't have a role, because obviously I do, being a midwife. However, I feel like there is a real interesting space between where those two meet, where a woman is able to birth in her power and the midwife's able to really hold that and ensure that she's not erasing any of that power from the woman. And I think that sometimes it can be quite tricky when you're there as a midwife and doubts or fears or worries creep in for the birthing woman, and they look to you for support. And it's really like feeling into like, what does that support look like? And there's always going to be opportunities for midwives to take the power if they want to. And I've been at many births where I have noticed that it feels like a choice point, where a woman's been in the pool birthing her baby and she's looked to you and almost like asked you to receive her baby. And for me, I've been really mindful about like, do I really want to put my hands into this pool? Because this is a moment that is going to be in this woman's life forever, in her memory and in her body. And I really don't feel like my hands need to be a part of that. So I think sometimes it can be so complicated because for so many of us, we've grown up in a society where, yeah, we're constantly handing our power over. And so when it comes to birth, we still want to hand our power over. And so going back to your original question about publicly funded home birth, I believe that there are midwives working in those models that are amazing and doing really good work. However, there's a lot of restrictions within the system, and how can they truly work in the way that they want. And I was one of those midwives that was working within the system and being told that, you know, this person's over 42 weeks, I'm not allowed to attend them at home.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, how can I not be allowed to attend someone at home? Like, who's making these rules? So, and like needing to agree to do certain testing, doing a 20-week ultrasound, things like that, where I don't really feel like it's up to us to dictate how women choose to have their pregnancy care. It's their body and their choice. It's not up to anybody to make that choice for them.
Yeah, I think the point you're making is so important for women to hear because I think it's very unclear to most women that there is a big difference between a publicly funded home birth with midwives and an independent midwife or a team that's independent, not connected to the state or the hospital or the whatever you want to say, right? So, and it is huge. It is a huge difference. An independent midwife can truly be a woman-centered and, as you say, serve a woman first. Whereas when you're employed with a publicly funded home birth program that usually is connected to a hospital, then you serve under the employer's rules. And they have these policies and guidelines that so often in maternity is not evidence-based or truly woman-centered. It is institution first. And I think it's beautiful that there are offers out there in countries like Australia and it's happening, you know, around the world, but it comes with a cost. It might be free, but what are you giving away when you choose that? And you have to be so aware of that. That you know, it's hard for women today to stay low risk, right? And I don't like that. No, you know, she's risky because she's low risk, right? It's the wording, right? But like it's hard for women to stay in that normal kind of healthy woman, healthy baby bracket, right? It's just decreasing, decreasing, decreasing. Almost no one is almost eligible for that home birth program anymore anyways. And they usually, you know, a lot of women get kicked out, as you say, going beyond 42 weeks or all these other things that classify them as high risk.
Absolutely. And if you can imagine after working in Bali, where I thought I had quite, you know, broad limits, and then being in Bali pushed all of my limits to further and beyond than I could have ever imagined. And that was usually working alongside some of the Indonesian midwives in their 60s and 70s that had really like seen everything. And then coming to Australia and yeah, being told that it wasn't okay for me to continue supporting this woman because her baby's breech or because the pregnancy has gone beyond 42 weeks or she didn't want to have a 20-week ultrasound. Yeah, it was a big shock to my system. The system was a big shock to my system. And I was reported to APRA within 3 months of working because I was going to go to the woman's house who was birthing at 43 weeks because she wasn't going to come to hospital and she wanted a midwife to support her. So I was going to go there and document that I was called in labor and I went there. So yeah, it's very tricky. And I think what you said, absolutely. It's a free service, but yeah, at what cost? There's many other costs.
True, very true. Okay, so you're pregnant and you're feeling this. So at one point, do you realize, okay, this is going to be a free birth?
I think quite early on, given that who was going to support me, and I felt very confident in my body and confident in my baby. I felt incredibly connected to my baby. And I was so fortunate to connect with a older midwife in Owen who I absolutely love. And she shared a lot of beautiful tools with me for really connecting in with my baby and developing this really deep sense of trust and what felt like learning how to really work in partnership with my baby. And I think I had already experimented with that as a midwife supporting families. However, it was so different to have my own experience of that and to notice how my baby responded to me talking to them, or different movement, listening to music, doing things where I was really connecting in with my baby, and it just felt so incredible and so beautiful. And I felt like it really felt like, what else do we need? Like we have this beautiful relationship. I feel so connected to you. I trust you so much, and I trust myself so much that I don't know what else I need.
Beautiful. So, did you have any early signs of labor approaching for you, or did it start with a bang?
It started with a bang, and I was convinced that it wasn't going to start with a bang. And I had this expectation that I would it would be later in the pregnancy, and that I would have, this lovely warm up, and I would go walking on the beach, and I would have a bath in the backyard, and I would maybe make some food and do things like that. But it started with a bang, and it took me by absolute surprise. Looking back, there was that whole day, there were signs that things were coming, and it definitely felt like my baby was choosing the time because there were family members around that were flying out the next day, and I think he wanted to meet them beforehand. So looking back, it made sense. But yeah, it started with a bang, an absolute bang.
All right, take us on the ride.
So we were actually moving house, and on the 15th of July, and this was the 12th of July. So, well, it was the 11th of July actually, in the evening, and the house was in disarray because we were moving, and it had only been a short-term house, and then we were going to another place to do 6 weeks of postpartum. However, I was sure that I would birth in that house. I was sure that we would move to the house and that I would birth there, and then I wouldn't move for 6 weeks. And again, like, I just love this expectation meets reality, and that it's not about you and it's not about what you want. It's a dance with you and your baby, and there's so many different things that are coming into play, and that real, like, letting go of control and surrendering to it. Because even even when things had started, I was still asking him just to wait for a few more days, which seems kind of funny that, yeah, I was like, oh, this is really painful. Oh, maybe he could just hold on, we could just wait for a few more days. So yeah, so I was blowing up the pool while my partner was trying to set up a birth space, and I was in quite strong labor at this stage. And yeah, trying to get the pool. We ended up calling my parents to get them to come over and help us with some of the more practical things, which I had actually not wanted them to be there for the birth, but the way things unfolded, we needed more hands on deck. So they were there and they were helping out. So they were able to take over with the pool. And I was in the shower. And I remember, I don't know, I think it was only about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes in. And I just was like, I cannot believe how painful this is. Like, I can't believe how intense this is. And how all of those hundreds and hundreds of women whose births that I'd attended, and how so many of them had been so internal and so calm and so quiet. And I was convinced that I was going to be one of those women. I was going to be in the pool, smiling and breathing my baby out. And that was not me at all. I was roaring, screaming, swearing, wild birther. And that took me by surprise as well. And again, like, in hindsight, just looking back on how, yeah, it's you don't have control, and just really, like, letting go of those expectations is one of the most beautiful gifts of birth, and trusting your baby and trusting that they're choosing their timing and that really you don't get to choose. You might be able to ask and put a few requests in, but there's two of you working together. So I was in the shower and I put my fingers in and I could feel his head. And I think it was probably like less than an hour after things had started. And I remember feeling very excited and equally like terrified that everything was happening so quickly and my body was moving so quickly and my head and heart were not there at all. Like I really had not caught up with what was going on. And so I remember talking to my baby and saying like I really need a bit of time to come to terms with what's going on and I really want to slow things down. And getting in the pool felt like it did that. I was very disappointed going into the pool because his head was already there and I was imagining that I would have this beautiful relief as I got into the water and I would just be like, oh, and it would feel amazing. And instead, I was like, I don't think I feel any different. Like it's just a different location. I still feel the same amount of intensity in my body and the same amount of like, yeah, you said take us on the ride. Like I felt like I was on a roller coaster and I was holding on. And if I shifted my energy, so if I kind of like loosened my focus a little bit or moved away, then it just felt completely overwhelming and like I couldn't be in it at all. And then I had to get back into that real place of focus. And I just remember thinking like I had no idea. Absolutely no idea. And almost not guilty, but there were a lot of feelings around like working with women and supporting them and having ideas or thoughts around like how they were moving through their experience and making assumptions based on like what I was witnessing in front of me or what I knew of them or what they were sharing with me. And then having this experience that just felt so incredibly intense and almost feeling like, oh, I could have done so much better. Like I could have done so much better for all of those women that I'd walked with and just, yeah. And again, going back to the ego that can exist in midwifery and how, yeah, like we can never know. We can never know. We can never know more. We can never know what's going on. We can have ideas and thoughts about how things are going, but it's not our experience.
Yeah.
And I think that was such a beautiful thing to have in that first hour of labor to be like, oh my God, this is absolutely massive. And I need like I need every single part of me to be in completely focused, and I needed to pull every single bit of my energy in to be able to be with it and stay with it.
Wow. Yeah. And also, I mean, incredible. Did you say 1 hour from first contraction to you were in the pool feeling the head?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a intense birth experience.
Yes.
Whatever birth, but especially your first, not having
Yes.
any warning. You had nothing before, any inkling. There was nothing saying that something's ripening here. It was just bam, 1 hour. Jesus. That is humbling.
So I had swollen feet that day, and I had a what I now like, well, later the next day, I was like, oh, they were tightenings. But I just think I was in denial. I was not ready. And so my body and my baby, even though I felt so deeply connected, they were telling me things. My body and my baby were letting me know what was going on. And I was like, yeah. I don't really want to know that. We need to get to this next house for me to like set up this beautiful birth space and settle in and feel grounded. I'm still in this like momentum or movement or this, more chaotic place with moving that from the house. So it was really like I wasn't listening to all the signs.
I love that actually, and I love this story, and I think it's also so common. I think it's so important for women to hear that it doesn't matter that you're a midwife. And like
Yes,
when you're pregnant and you're birthing, you are a birthing woman, period.
yes,
Like doesn't
yes,
matter if you're a birth worker. And I love birth workers coming on and sharing their stories because it's always like that.
yeah,
Oh, in hindsight, I could say, or but I was like, and so many say, I was in denial or I was this and that. And like, you can't really midwife yourself through your own birth. You
no,
just, no.
you can't.
Love that.
Yeah. I think
Mm.
it can come up in moments, and maybe people try to, however, it doesn't always work. And there was another piece that again, was a hindsight piece. That morning, I had texted my friend who's a midwife who we work together and I'd said to her, do you want to listen to this song again? I'd sent her this song, which we'd listened to on repeat at a birth a few weeks prior. And she was like, what do you mean? Kind of thing. Like, what does that mean? Like, what are you implying? And when I look back, I'm like, oh, there was something in my psyche, there was something in my field that knew that birth was happening and birth was happening soon, because this song was like had quite a story attached to it. And I think not being able to midwife yourself, like often people say to me, like, oh, of course you had quick births because you're a midwife. And I think, no,
No.
actually, no. And people often are like, oh, you can do it on your own because you're a midwife. And I feel like, if anything, it can be harder
Yes.
because you have hundreds, or however, people have tens, hundreds, thousands of birth imprints that they need to work through in order to clear the way for their own birth experience and move that all out of the way. And fortunately for me, most of the births that I'd attended were incredibly beautiful physiological home births. However, earlier that year, I had worked with a beautiful family who'd lost their baby. So I'd been pregnant, supporting a family who had lost their baby. And the last birth that I'd attended, one of the last births, was a shoulder dystocia. And that actually showed up in this birth. It showed up in this birth, and it was to do with this song that I mentioned, because that was the birth that had this song on repeat that I'd thought about the day that I went into labor. And so I was in the pool and I'd managed, I don't really know what happened. I felt like I wanted to slow everything down. So I wanted things to slow right down. And I spent quite a bit of time in the pool. And when I was birthing my baby, I felt like I had to work pretty hard to get him out. Like I had to, it wasn't like it wasn't a flowing, pushing phase. It was very much I needed a lot of work and I had to put a lot of energy and focus into it, which was the whole time really. It was incredibly intense and required every little part of me. And when his head was born, I was still in the pool and his head was out. And I was just sitting with that and sitting with the intensity of those feelings. And then I had this full body memory of feeling like he's stuck. I was like, he's stuck. And I think I might have said it aloud, like he's stuck. And then I put my leg up and he came out in one go. And I feel so confident that that was in relation to some of the one of those last births that I'd attended, which was a very intense and tricky birth. And I really had that in my body and in my mind and in my field. And perhaps his shoulders were a little sticky. Perhaps my baby's shoulders were a little sticky. Perhaps I was, remembering what it felt like to be at that other birth. I don't really know, but there was some connection to that. And I find that so fascinating that for midwives and birth workers, we have to really move through those birth imprints in order for it not to influence our own birth experiences. And it really took me 3 births to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and also that is a part of our story, right? It's a part of our, you know, it's it's not so easy to work through things as well without experiencing them yourself. Sometimes it's so deep. You had that experience and that memory, and then you kind of release it through what you just then did. You opened your legs, you put your leg up and everything, and baby came out. Like it's also a
Mm,
part of us. Like being a midwife is so intertwined with who you are. It's a lifestyle. And so we're so enmeshed with all the families we've ever been with and all their births. So it does live in us. And
mm,
but to be aware of it and um to be aware of it, I think is the key, isn't it? And be aware of if it is coming up, if it is interfering, if it is a hindrance within your own journey of pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Awareness, I
mm,
think, is key.
yeah. And I still don't know whether that was entirely my own experience or whether that was
Mm.
something that I hadn't fully worked through from someone else's birth experience.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it was perfect. It was
Yes.
perfect.
Yes.
So your baby's shooting out into the pool. What happens?
I received him, I pulled him up out of the water, and I just still cannot, it's just so hard to describe that feeling of like that you've birthed this baby, that you've been this portal into another world, and the relief and the joy and the gratitude and the overwhelm. And it's just like so many feelings all at once. And something that I will never forget is that it's like the duality of feeling like you're the most powerful thing in the whole world and you could do anything and everything. And at the same time, you're just a grain of sand and you're just as insignificant as a grain of sand on the beach. Like, I just love how birth can be the most transformational experience, and at the same time, it's the most ordinary experience. It's just like my parents came in and my friend was there and my partner was there, and I was just holding him in the pool, and everyone was like having cups of tea and watching me meet my baby. And yeah, it was just so beautiful. And yeah, so perfect. So perfect. And I did say to him when he was born, which has always made me laugh because I'd spent years watching women sing their babies in and have this beautiful poem that were the first words that they would share with their baby, and working at Burmese Heart with families of all different faiths. Often it was a prayer, so it would be like a Hindu prayer or a Muslim prayer, or yeah, the baby would receive these beautiful words. And I looked into my baby's eyes and said, "Thank you for coming out. That was fucking hardcore." That was that was what I said to him. And he was like, "Okay." And that's how I felt. Like it was all of every single all of the elements of an experience, like the intensity, the beauty, the calmness, the epicness, like all of it all rolled into one. And I just felt so, yeah, so happy to have him in my arms.
And in the end, like, how long time from the first contraction that you felt like this is where it's starting to when you had him in your arms? How fast?
Well, I ended up, I think it was almost 4 hours. So
Mm.
it did slow right down after that first like intense hour where I was like, oh, his head's right there. And I do wonder if if my denial may have kind of, done anything or not. Because again, I always wonder, do you really have any control? And sometimes I think maybe people do, and sometimes I think they don't. So
Well, it's very curious, isn't it? Because, we have women like you where it just like comes on and it's like a train just going through you and bam, you have a baby. And really, there's nothing almost that. I mean, it does sound like you could slow it down a bit there because you said you felt the head after just an hour and then you had 3 hours of actually bringing him through. So,
Mm,
so we definitely do have, I believe, truly the power to, influence the birth journey. And then you have some women
mm.
that can totally close, right? You know how
Yes.
we know that, right? The cervix can open and close, and things can drag
Mm.
on, and you can go for days, and it's so
Yeah.
mental, right? We're so powerful. Our minds. I mean, I get more
Yeah.
and more fascinated every day, every year about the
Mm.
power of our minds, and I feel like I'm understanding deeper and deeper. Truly, it's
Mm.
maybe started a few years ago with like, yeah, I understand logically, but like actually understanding and seeing women really stopping their labor or not starting their labor or like just prolong, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
we're you know.
Yeah.
But then we have women like yourself who just truly it starts and it just doesn't stop and the baby comes and it seemingly looks like there's nothing but just to hang on for dear life through those intense
Mm.
hours.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Birth is fascinating, and I feel like you really resonate with this too, that we are along for the mystery as the
Mm.
first contraction starts, and that truly, even though we might have seen hundreds thousands of births, right,
Mm.
and we have all this knowledge as birth workers, truly we're a student every time, aren't we?
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I love that was my biggest learning was that, yeah, there's so much I don't know.
Mm.
And it was almost like you're at the beginning again, like this
Yeah,
is the beginning. And I love that. I was like, oh, thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for sharing that with me.
yeah. And that is truly I feel like the biggest truth, that we will never figure it out. And I think
Mm.
that's also what I love about being a birth worker and what I love about, working in this field, is that you are constantly in awe and you're constantly in the mystery, and
Mhm.
you will never be nothing else but the student every time. And if you
Mm.
think you're more, then you're in a danger to the
Mm.
process.
Absolutely. It's so true. Yeah. Because I feel like the birth invites you to sit with the unknown, and then you're like, oh, I'm starting to get to know you a little bit. And then they're like, oh, just come over here, move over here. Oh, there's a bit more, there's a bit more. Or it like brings you to like the edge of a precipice, and then you go there and it brings you to another edge and another edge and another edge. And so I think that's so true. Like you're always going to be a student, whether you're supporting women in birthing, whether you're birthing your own babies. Because again, I thought my next birth, I had ideas about how my second birth would go, even though my first birth had showed me that like expectation and reality are two very different things, and that it's a mystery, and you're working in partnership with your baby, and what you want doesn't necessarily equate to what's going to happen. So it took many many tries to really deeply embody that.
Yeah. And that's the journey, isn't it? I mean, who
Mm.
gets it the first time, really?
Yeah.
Does anyone? So, okay, take us to your second then. So, were they close together? What's
Um,
your journey?
so my son turned 2. I was pregnant when my son turned 2. So 2 years, almost 2 years and 10 months, or 2 years and 9 months. Lots of threes in our family. So I was 33 when I had my first baby. He was born at 3:33 a.m. And then him and his sister were 33 months apart. And then his birth date was a 3. So there was a lot of like interesting numerology, and my partner's quite into numerology. So we had a lot of threes around us. Yeah, so that wasn't the plan to have threes in the gap between. But she, yeah, I didn't know she was a she. I didn't know what any of them were. I hoped they were babies. That was my yeah. So I feel like I had expectations again around a second birth. And even though I had had all of these experiences that had showed me that, yeah, there is no rule book, or there's no like this is what usually happens. And with my first thinking, like it was more likely that he would be born at 41 weeks and he was born at 39 weeks, or this kind of thing. So there was still these elements of like midwifery training in me that were kind of making me think about different timelines. So I was more open to when my daughter might come, thinking that, yeah, it could be any time really. However, she surprised us and came earlier again. So she was born at 38 weeks, which was interesting because I invited my parents to her birth because I thought it might be really lovely to have them there for our son. And they'd been at the first birth and they'd been super respectful and held the space beautifully. And it had been a really, yeah, wonderful experience for everyone. And we were living in a different place, so they needed to take a plane. So they'd booked flights to arrive. And she decided to arrive. She decided to be born before they came. And I thought that was very interesting because for my son, they weren't meant to be at the birth and they were. And for my daughter, they were invited to the birth and she chose to arrive before that. So I think every baby really has its own, yeah, own pathway and own ideas about how they want their birth to look. So I expected that my birth may be fast again. I was hoping that it wasn't going to be as fast. I was spending a lot of time speaking with my baby about how I would really love time in labor, that I would really like to be present in the labor and not have that experience of really just holding on, and that I really wanted to spend time with my son and to kind of like be quite intentional about that transition of becoming a family of 4. And that all happened. So that was really interesting again to kind of like be asking for what I was willing for and being very intentional about what I was wanting to invite in. However, not really holding it with too much importance and having openness. So still focusing on what I wanted and what I would like to happen. However, surrendering to the unknown and knowing that there was more than one person who was going to be doing this dance with me. And so we had this very beautiful labor, which it really just felt so blissful. I loved every moment of the labor with my daughter. It was so gentle, and I had this beautiful time with my son, who was 2 years and 9 months. We got to have this beautiful time together. I had time with my partner. I had time alone and had quite a lot of tears around, the shifting family dynamic and becoming a family of 4 and letting go of, yeah, my first baby being the youngest and all of those big feelings that come up. And I had a friend who came to support me, and she was really, really helpful and really beautiful in that I felt like I needed more support in the birth. In the labor, I was alone and it was magical. In the birth, again, I worked really, really hard to birth her. So hard. It's harder than my son. And yeah, which took me by surprise. It really took me by surprise. And I remember thinking with her that I just don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know how I can do this. This is so intense. And I was finding it so hard to stay with it and be in it. And I kept wanting to dissociate, and I kept wanting to be in different places, and I wanted to leave at some point. And this was all very internal, because I have found with all three births, I've really been very quiet, internal. I don't really look at people. I don't particularly enjoy being touched a lot, and I don't really talk much. I have music, and I'm very much in the music and in my body. So I was looking around and like kind of looking for a way to get out of there. And again, like hindsight, looking back, there was a lot of things that had happened in that pregnancy with my daughter. That was like the height of COVID. We'd moved country without wanting to. We'd been in Indonesia, and then we'd come to Australia for a holiday and got stuck in Australia. We weren't allowed to return to Indonesia because of the Australian rules around leaving the country. So there was a lot of feelings of powerlessness and frustration and feeling trapped and not being able to move in the way that we wanted to, and not being in the place that we'd chosen to be in. And there was also some difficulties in my relationship with my mum. There was quite a big rupture in the relationship during that time while I was pregnant. And I really feel like that was a huge part of why birthing my daughter was so hard. It really felt like there were times, even while I was birthing her, and I was like deep in the pain and deep in all of the feelings, and I felt so clearly like this is not my pain. I felt so clearly like this is not mine. This is not my pain. Like I don't know whose this is, but it's for me to kind of work with and move through. And I really feel like it was had a lot to do with my maternal lineage and things that had happened with my mum, and a lot of moving through this generational pain of the women in my family. And it was birthing my daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was there to really help us heal some of this and work through the pain with me. And it was really hard. It was incredibly hard.
What was it that was hard? Can you describe it for us? Like, what was it that you classified?
It was staying with it, like staying with it and being in it, and just and trusting it, like trusting this pain, trusting this process, trusting the unknowing. Like, I don't know why this is so painful. I don't feel connected to this pain, as in, I don't feel like it's coming from my own body. However, it's for me to work with. So really just trusting that this is how it's meant to be. This is what we're here to do. And you don't have to understand it to trust it.
Beautiful. So how long was this birth? How did you move through it? Where did you labor? Where did you birth?
So again, it was quite short. It was only 3 hours. It felt like 30 years of all the places that I went to. I labored in the bedroom and lots of moving around, and my son was there. He was so beautiful and so caring, and he was stroking my back and stroking my belly. And then I moved into the pool much sooner than I had with my son, and I did find it relief. I did find relief. I found it relaxing. I enjoyed being in the pool, and I enjoyed the change in pace. That my first labor was so fast and furious, and there was more gentleness and more intention, and I was able to kind of make choices around what I wanted to do and what felt good, rather than holding on, which was more the first experience. And so she was born in the water. We were in the pool for maybe it was an hour or an hour and a half. I'm not sure. I was definitely in there for a longer time. before it was intense. And my son was bouncing on the side of the pool and having a great time and really loving it. And I had to ask my friend to take him out to the lounge room for a bit of time because I really needed to focus on bringing her down and just really like being with this intensity. It felt like I couldn't have him there because it felt so distracting to be wanting to or noticing that he was there and then just all the places that this intensity was taking me to, and really having to come to that place of like, I don't need to figure it out. I don't need to know what's going on. And I kept having this vision, which was, it was like an eclipse. So it was like the shadow going over the sun. And I remember with having my head against the side of the birth pool and looking down, and I could feel her head down there, like emerging. And it was the same image that, like, what I'd imagined the image to look like of the eclipse. And it was really like, there's nowhere to go but through. Like, you just have to go through it, go with it, go in it. And I think prior to that, I was thinking of ways to move away from it. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the big things that it was bringing up and how it was really confronting and quite scary, actually, like some of the different parts that were emerging. And again, such a surprise because I had this expectation that it was my second baby. My first birth was 4 hours. So I really imagined that she might just slide out or I'd breathe her out. And yeah, so again, it was that real like expectation versus reality. And there's so many more things going on that we don't know.
Yeah.
And there's all of these unseen parts and unknown parts. And as much as we want to understand and have all the answers, like sometimes there is no answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like through your story that she's really coming with some lineage healing. And yeah, that it sounds like there was a lot of kind of emotional pain or other kinds of pain than just the physical connected to what you were going through that made it into that harder experience. Is that right?
It was deep emotional pain that I had never experienced before. And it felt so foreign, which is why I wondered whether it was my own. And maybe, yeah, maybe it wasn't my own. Maybe it was somebody else's. Maybe it was a pain that was stored so deep that is my own that I'd never quite opened up to. So yeah, it was huge. It was definitely the emotional pain felt like it really took over from the physical pain.
Wow, what a journey. And again, like birth is such a teacher and healer and all the things, right? So much more than what it's made out to be in our modern world. It's not just a
Yeah.
physical event. And when you truly understand that, then we're coming close to be able to walk with women through it.
Yes,
Mm,
absolutely.
beautiful. Wow. Okay, so she's birthed in the pool. Do you want
Yeah.
to share a bit about that with us?
I felt so much more present um, when she was there, when she was born, like when I was holding her in my arms and meeting her for the first time. It felt so much more calm. And it's interesting because my older son is such an old soul, and I felt so deeply connected with him in pregnancy. And she was much more playful. She would be coming in and out and laughing and being silly while throughout pregnancy. But the birth experience when he arrived, it was just so much. Like it was so many things. Whereas when she arrived, it felt like just this kind of deep knowing and this deep presence. And yeah, like we'd been waiting for her. Like she's here now and she's here with a much bigger journey than we'll ever know. It was really, really beautiful. It was, yeah, I can see this photo in my mind of just her looking up at me, and just the way that she met my eyes for the first time was just so magical. And she's still like that. They both are.
Beautiful. And then I'm guessing that you had another couple of years and something before you became pregnant again.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Same gap. So 2 years, 9 months again. Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah. 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 And the pregnancy for me was so different because life was so busy and so full, and it took a huge amount of energy to really like make time and space to connect in and to really be communicating with this little baby that was in my body, because I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we were building a house in Bali, and I was working, and my partner was running a studio, and life was very full. And I felt very determined to not let the pregnancy go by without making that time and space, because I wasn't sure if I'll be pregnant again. And it's just something that I just feel like pregnancy is just such a gift, and it's so magical. And I know for some people they don't enjoy pregnancy, but for me, I absolutely love pregnancy. I feel like it's such a privilege to grow a baby. It's a superpower to grow a baby, and I will always be a miracle. I just think how amazing. So really wanting to slow things down and really be in the experience. And so again, that beautiful crone midwife that I worked with in my first pregnancy, she taught me about doing baby love breaks. And so really having intentional time throughout the day where you stop what you're doing and lay down and speak with your baby. And I'd already got into such a great habit of communicating with my baby and letting them know what I was doing, if I was going in the shower, and that they were going to feel warmth on their body as I was having a shower, or if I was diving into the ocean and they were going to feel cool around them, and they might feel difference in me, or if I was feeling stressed at work, that was what was going on. So I have always done that in the pregnancy, just communicated everything that was going on and letting them know how I'm feeling, what's happening out here. And because of course they know it all already. They're already sensing, feeling, seeing, learning, hearing everything. So yeah, really nice to be able to give voice to those experiences as well. And when I was in very early pregnancy, so we were living in Bali again. So we'd done quite a lot of back and forth. We were living in Bali, building a house in Bali, and living in this absolutely beautiful house that we were incredibly happy in, building a house. And we were in Western Australia, and I had this very clear message from this baby: they want to be born by the ocean. And the ocean was in Western Australia. And so that both the other babies were born in Darwin. And this baby was like, I want to be born by the ocean. And I was like, where in Bali can you be born by the ocean? Trying to figure out where that would be. And it just felt so clear that it was not Bali, it was Australia. And that felt tricky, given that our whole life was set up in Bali, and were we really going to move our family of 5 to Perth for birthing when it was quite difficult to find housing and things like that. But I just really trusted that that was what we were doing, and that was what this baby was asking for. And we did all of that. We were very fortunate to find somewhere to stay short term, that fit with the time. So we came and spent, I think it was 2 months or 3 months in Western Australia, for him to be born. And in the months leading up to his birth, I was really curious about having a midwife. So I started thinking about, like, what would it be like to be really supported during birth? And what would it feel like to be held? And what would it feel like to have someone give you that love and care in this life experience? And maybe part of it was that it might be my last birth. Maybe part of it was that I had these two very different birth experiences, which were very, one was, I would say one was quite hard. The second one was hard. The first one, I don't know if it was hard, but it was epic. And I'd shown myself that I could do it all on my own. But why did I want to? Like, why did I need to? Like, again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation around receiving, like, why did I not want to receive in this experience of birth, which is really historically, women have been supported and honored and cared for and loved during birth. And I did experience that in my births with my partner and my friend who was there. However, most of it was me. And like I said, I was quite internal, and I felt like, yeah, I was really on my own journey, and the other people were just kind of like bystanders. And I wanted to know what it would feel like to have someone like walk along that journey with you. And so I started looking at what was available, whether there was somebody that would be a good fit for me in Perth, and if that was something that I was, that I was really wanting and seeking. And I did meet a birth worker that I really enjoyed. We got along very well, and it felt like that could be something that I would like. I'd like to have her there. And she actually gave me a massage on the day that I went into labor with my third baby. So she was there, she was part of it, and she was communicating with me and with my baby. And yeah, and then that night I started feeling like things were happening. My parents had just arrived the day before, and my brother and his family were around. So I'd been kind of hoping that my parents would be there to be able to be available for my two younger children. But it was Christmas and New Year, so like lots of people moving in and out, and I was hoping that we would make it to a time where there was someone available to hang out with my son and daughter, although trusting that it would work out if not. And so that night I went into labor, and I think, yeah, it was 45 minutes from start to placenta being out. So if I thought my previous births were fast, this one just was very fast. And it wasn't intense, and it wasn't epic, and it wasn't painful, and it wasn't hard. It was absolutely beautiful and easeful and magical, and I enjoyed every single moment of it. And it was just incredible. I just didn't know that I could have a birth like that. I didn't know that that was possible for me. And I'm so grateful to have had such different experiences. And everything about it was different because I birthed in the shower. So my partner was getting the pool ready and I was in the bedroom. And once I started to realize that things were happening, I did something similar that I'd done the previous birth. So my son came in, I had some time with him, let him know that he was going to be a big brother again soon. He went out, my daughter came in, I let her know she was going to be a big sister. So we really got to have that beautiful time together and talk about the shifting family dynamic and what was going to happen. And then I was just listening to music and I was so deep in the music and I was like, oh, okay, this is starting to feel strong. I'm going to hop into the shower while they get the pool ready. And I was in the shower for probably all of 10 minutes or something. I was in the shower and I had my eyes closed and I opened them, and my daughter was at the shower door with her hand on the glass door. And so I opened the door and she gave me a kiss. And then she went outside, and her and my son and my parents were playing outside on the swings. And then I was in the shower. My partner came in and he was born in, I think maybe about 10 minutes after having the shower. I just felt him ready to come out, and he just came out in one go. And it was just the most incredible feeling to have it was just so easeful and flowing and beautiful. It was so beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful.
Beautiful. One thing we haven't spoken of is the birth of your placentas. And also, I'm curious, as a midwife, what's your thoughts about like tears? And did you have a practice around that with your babies?
Yeah. I did think about placentas afterwards because I realized we moved on to the next birth without finishing the first birth. So with my son, I completely forgot about birthing the placenta. Like, as I said, I was so deep in all the feelings, and I'd hopped into bed. I think I'd stayed in the pool for quite a while, and then I hopped in the bed, and then about 2 hours later, my friend said, "Oh, what are you feeling about your placenta?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." So very disconnected from that part of the birth because I was just so present with my baby and meeting my baby, and I guess having had lots of experiences with different times of placentas being born, that I wasn't concerned about whether it needed to happen sooner rather than later. And then I was able to move to the toilet. So I tried to birth the placenta on the side of the bed, and it didn't really feel comfortable. It was quite awkward for me. So I moved to the toilet and was able to birth the placenta there. So my first birth, I had a very deep tear. And as I was sharing about how his head was out, and then I felt like he was a bit stuck, and then I moved my leg and he kind of shot out in one go. I imagine and felt that his shoulder kind of made quite a deep, it was like short and deep tear, and very painful, and took quite a long time to heal.
And how did you go about healing it? What was your philosophy there and practice?
Resting was resting was what I did most. I feel like that was what I was prioritizing, was really resting with that tear. And warmth to aid healing. And I did a lot of work with my mind. So I did a lot of guided visualizations around like healing tissue. And I even, I was visualizing like the tissues getting brought together, and even at some points like having silver thread bringing it all together. And I definitely feel like that was a huge part in aiding healing. So I did experiment with things that I used to use in my midwifery practice, so like Manuka, and things like that. However, for me, it was rest, warmth, and just being really intentional with my body and how I would like my body to heal. And so really giving it the best chance to heal.
Beautiful. What does warmth mean?
So I used to use like a wheat bag and just have that on the area. So depending on comfort levels, and not straight away, like not immediately. So just really wanting to have warmth there and help aid blood flow for the tissue to repair. And I know that now it's much more common for people to be moving away from using cold, but that was something that was very commonly used when I first became a midwife, was
Yeah.
ice packs. And I remember years ago people starting to say, actually, cold isn't good. We want to be looking at warming the body and helping to increase the blood flow with warmth.
Mm. Beautiful. And with your second and third?
So my second and third, both times, as soon as I stood up, the placenta fell out. So with my second, it was something in the back of my mind because that was a longer time for the placenta, and it felt like I still needed to give some attention to my body for the placenta to be born. So it was very much like my body was like, no, there's still more work to be done. I need your focus and attention here to do that. So with my second, it was something I was thinking of. And as I stood up to move from the pool to the bed, the placenta just came out in that action. And I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you, body. Thank you, placenta. Thank you, baby. Thank you for making that really easeful. And my third was the same. I stood up to move from the shower to the bed, and yeah, it came out.
Beautiful. And did you have any tearing then?
Third, no. Second, the same tear, opened slightly. Yeah. In my third pregnancy, I did internal work a number of times, and I'm not saying that was like the silver bullet or that it was the reason why things were different, but it definitely helped. And I feel like there was a lot of emotional pain stored in that scar tissue. And so by being really intentional about, like, I went to someone who did internal work, I did it myself, and it was very like lots of love and care and compassion and acknowledgement about all of the things that had happened and my previous births, and how to care for my body, and I guess having more of an understanding about how all of our emotions are held in our pelvic bowl. And so being able to see that perhaps there was an element of that in my second birth as well, where there was all that pain plus the scar tissue. All that pain had kind of like found its way into that scar tissue from the tearing of from my first birth. So I think it was all quite intertwined.
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. Is there something more that you want to share to complete your birth stories?
I think I've shared all of the bits that feel most present and most top of mind.
Beautiful. So, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
I would tell her that she's more powerful than she could ever imagine, and that she's capable of things beyond her wildest imagination, and that she doesn't need to understand birth or understand all the inner workings of her body or understand all the stages of labor or have an understanding of all the theory in order to trust birth and trust herself and trust her body. And that it's this beautiful dance between her and her baby. And so I would encourage putting your energy and intention into that partnership and feeling like when you're in that deep communication with your baby, you can, whatever happens, you're going to feel really connected and really in tune. And that's such a beautiful part start to motherhood.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your journey and birthing wisdom with us.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.